Welcome back, everyone, to the Seniors Confessions channel. My husband and I just bought a $12 billion apartment. My mother-in-law hurriedly sold her house in the countryside for $3 billion and came to demand contributing $150 million to live with us. My husband immediately said one sentence that made her collapse on the spot. We had bought the $12 billion apartment for exactly 3 days when my mother-in-law suddenly arrived from the countryside with all her luggage, saying she had sold her $3 billion house and wanted to contribute $150 million upfront to live with us. At that moment, I still didn't understand what was actually happening. I only saw my husband, Duck Min, remain silent for a long time after hearing what his mother said. That silence didn't seem like surprise, but rather as if he had known this storm would arrive sooner or later. My name is Hanan, and I am 36 years old this year. As for my husband, Duck Min, who is 2 years older than me, he works in financial risk assessment. This $12 billion apartment is the result of nearly 10 years of effort. We both scraped and saved, working day and night. It sounds impressive to say we bought the house, but we actually borrowed nearly half from the bank. Every month, watching the mortgage payment automatically deducted from my account, my heart still tightens. But in return, standing in the middle of the sun-drenched living room, looking at the city stretching out behind the large glass, I tell myself I finally have a real home. Every corner of that apartment bears the handiwork of my husband and me. The beige sofa set was chosen by Duck Min after changing models 3 times because he was afraid I would get back pain from sitting too long. The L-shaped kitchen with white stone countertops is something I dreamed of since the days we lived in a rented room of less than 30 square meters. Even the pendant light above the dining table took us nearly 2 hours to choose. Because I wanted a soft yellow light, while he preferred a simple, understated style. To others, it is just furniture. To me, it represents years of late nights meeting deadlines, every frugal meal, and every time we looked at each other to encourage one another to keep going. That weekend, Duck Min and I organized a very simple housewarming meal. I didn't want any noise, nor did I want to invite many people. We just called to invite my husband's parents from the countryside to come for a meal, see our new home, and then return in the evening. That morning, I woke up early to go to the market and pick out a nice chicken. I bought some shrimp and fresh vegetables, cooking a few dishes suitable for elderly palates. Duck Min even carefully called his mother to remind her, "Mom and Dad, just come for a visit, don't bring anything heavy. We have everything we need at home." Over the phone, my mother-in-law, Mrs. Kim On, just laughed. "I know, I'm just coming to see my son's new house. It's not like I'm moving in, don't worry." Yet, nearly 11 a.m., the doorbell rang incessantly. At first, I thought my parents-in-law weren't used to the doorbell, so I wiped my hands and rushed to open it. But as soon as the door opened, I froze. In front of me, there were not only my parents-in-law but also a large red and blue sack, 2 old suitcases, a cardboard box tied with crisscrossing nylon strings, and several bulging fabric bags scattered right at the doorway. "Mom, why did you two bring so many things?" I tried to keep my voice sounding normal. Mrs. Kim On didn't answer right away. She dragged her suitcase straight into the house, scanning the place as she walked. Her gaze swept over the living room, stopping at the sofa, then the dining table, the wine cabinet, and the shiny kitchen. In that look, there was wonder, but also something that made me feel uncomfortable. It didn't look like the gaze of a mother happy for her child, but rather the look of someone seeing something they wanted to claim. "Wow, this place must be worth over 10 billion, if not more." She reached out to touch the kitchen stone countertop, clicking her tongue in amazement. Living in the city really is wonderful. With a kitchen like this and a living room like this, elderly people can finally stay healthy. I turned to look at my father-in-law, Mr. Van Looy. He stood outside the door, still holding a sack, his face visibly tense. He didn't step inside immediately, instead looking at me apologetically as if he wanted to say something but stopped. Duck Min came out from the room and, seeing the scene, also hesitated. He stepped forward quickly to help his father with the bags and asked his mother, "Mom, did you bring the whole house with you?" Mrs. Kim On glanced at him and gave a half smile. "It's my son's new house. What's wrong with bringing some country things so it feels like home? Should I have come empty-handed?" That meal began in a very strange atmosphere. I still tried to be welcoming, kept inviting my parents-in-law to eat, and even served my mother-in-law some tender chicken, but my mind was stuck on the bags and suitcases in the hallway. My father-in-law ate very little, occasionally glancing at his wife as if trying to stop her from saying something. Mrs. Kim On was different. She ate quite naturally, looking around the house, praising the spacious living room one moment and complaining that the plants on the balcony weren't feng shui compliant the next. Halfway through the meal, she suddenly set her chopsticks down. Her voice was light, but that sentence made my hand freeze in midair. Your father and I will probably be staying here for a while. I looked up instantly, and Duck Min also stopped eating. The room suddenly went so quiet that I could clearly hear the steady hum of the air conditioner on the ceiling. What do you mean by staying here? I asked slowly. Mrs. Kim On sighed, though her eyes didn't look as sad as her voice. I sold the house back home for $3 billion, so there's nothing left for us to go back to. My son bought such a big house, it's only natural for his parents to come and live with him. We're old now, it's convenient to be close to our children and grandchildren. I was stunned. Selling their home back home was such a major decision, yet, my husband and I hadn't heard a single word about it beforehand. I looked over at Duck Min, waiting for his reaction, but what sent a chill down my spine was that he didn't seem very surprised. His face tightened, his gaze lowered, like someone who had just seen something they feared finally come to pass. Meanwhile, Mrs. Kim On calmly picked up another piece of shrimp, as if the story she had just told was merely about whether it was sunny or raining today. She gave me a faint smile and continued, "Oh, I know this house is the fruit of your hard work. Don't worry, I won't just freeload. I've got it all planned out." I set my chopsticks down, and a very bad feeling suddenly rose within me, and I was, indeed, not wrong. Because right after that meal, Mrs. Kim On pulled her old suitcase toward the dining table, unlocked it, and took out a thick envelope, placing it in front of me. But that is a story for later. The meal ended in awkwardness. I stood up to clear the dishes, trying my best to keep my hands from shaking. My mother-in-law remained seated, leisurely wiping her mouth with a tissue, her eyes scanning the living room like someone viewing a model home. My father-in-law started to get up to help me take the tray to the kitchen, but Ms. Kim On pulled his arm, saying flatly, "Just sit down, this is our son's house, not a guest's, no need to be formal." That sentence made my back stiffen. I didn't turn around, just silently carried the stack of bowls to the sink. Duck Min followed me, grabbing a towel to wipe the table as usual, but I could clearly see his jaw tightening. He didn't say anything, and I didn't ask. There are moments, when a couple has lived together long enough, that just one look is enough to understand that the other is struggling inside. When I returned to the living room, Ms. Kim On had already pulled her old dark brown suitcase close to the tea table. It was an old-fashioned suitcase with scratched corners, and a red fabric string tied to the handle to keep the lock from popping open. She leaned down to unlock it, her movements very slow, as if preparing to take out something of great importance. Then she pulled a thick yellow envelope from among the jumbled clothes and placed it right in the middle of the table. "I'll contribute $150 million first to help with the house," she said it so naturally, her tone even carrying a hint of condescension. "When I can scrape together more, I'll give you more. We're one family, I won't let you two be at a disadvantage." I looked at that envelope, and a choked feeling that was hard to name suddenly rose in my chest. If she had said this was a little money to celebrate our new home, I might have been touched. If she had said they were having a hard time and asked to stay for a while, I would have discussed it with my husband to make arrangements. But that word, contribute, echoed in my brand new living room, sounding as heavy as a stone thrown into calm water. This house didn't just appear out of nowhere. It represents a long-term bank loan, nights I spent hunched over my laptop until 2 a.m., and times Duck Min returned from business trips only to sit and calculate interest rates with me until our eyes were sore. Yet now, just a $150 million envelope is placed on the table. My mother-in-law spoke as if she had just laid a brick in the foundation of this house. Seeing me silent, Ms. Kim On thought I had given in. She leaned back against the sofa, eyes sweeping down the hallway as she began to calculate. "That small room at the end of the hall, I think it's a waste to use it for storage. Move those decorative boxes of yours out to the balcony. The room on the other side is just right for us to stay in. It's more convenient for elderly people to sleep near the restroom. And for Min's home office, if Fuck comes to visit later, we can just put a folding bed in there." Hearing the name Hoang Fuck, I instinctively looked over at my husband. Duck Min was standing by the TV stand, holding a glass of water but not drinking. His face had gone completely cold, not with sudden anger, but with a deep, heavy frostiness. He set the glass down on the table, no longer looking at the envelope but straight at his mother. "Take this money back, Mom," he said. Mrs. Kim On frowned. "What do you mean, take it back? I told you I was contributing to the house for you too." Duck Min kept his voice calm. "My wife and I bought this house for ourselves to live in. If you and Dad need to stay temporarily, we can talk about it clearly, but I won't accept this kind of contribution." Mrs. Kim On's expression changed instantly. The smile vanished from her lips, replaced by a look of self-pity that she conjured up very quickly. She turned to look at my father-in-law, then back at me, as if trying to find witnesses to her son's unfilial behavior. "So, I can't even give you money now?" She gave a bitter laugh. "You just bought a slightly bigger house and you're already afraid I'll take a share. I gave birth to you and raised you. Now I'm just contributing 150 million, and you act like I'm begging for food." I intended to speak up and explain, but Duck Min reached out and gently stopped me. He didn't want me to be dragged into this scene of accusations. He just looked at his mother and asked one question. "How much did you sell the house for?" That question made Mrs. Kim freeze, just for a split second, very quickly, but I still saw her hand resting on the envelope tense up. My father-in-law bowed his head even lower, his hands clutching the hot teacup so tightly his knuckles turned white. 3 billion, she replied very quickly, but selling a house doesn't mean having the full 3 billion in hand. After paying off miscellaneous debts, paperwork fees, and taking care of this and that, whatever was left, I brought here first. Duck Min stared at the envelope on the table. His expression wasn't that of a son listening to his mother tell the story of selling their house, but rather like someone fitting the final piece into a puzzle he had long since seen. A sudden chill ran down my spine. "What kind of random debts are you paying off?" he pressed further. Mrs. Kim began to look genuinely annoyed. "Why are you asking so many questions? It's my money, my house. I sold it and I'll handle it myself. I've brought it now to contribute to our life together. That should be enough. Or do you want me to give it to you and still have to account for every single cent?" Duck Min didn't answer right away. He just pulled out a chair and sat down opposite his mother. The spacious living room suddenly felt suffocatingly cramped. I stood by the dining table, watching the envelope of 150 million sitting silently on the surface, my heart growing more uneasy by the second. Because if it were truly just a matter of parents selling their house to live with their son, why was my father-in-law shaking so much? Why did my mother-in-law dodge the question when Duck Min asked about the proceeds from the house sale? And why was Duck Min not the least bit surprised? My father-in-law finally looked up. He moved his lips as if to say something, but Mrs. Kim shot him a sharp, icy glare. With just that one look, he fell silent, lowered his head, and his trembling hand raised the teacup to his lips, but he couldn't bring himself to drink. No one in the room raised their voice or slammed the table, but I had the feeling that just one more sentence would cause something long hidden in my husband's family to burst wide open. And at that moment, that 150 million envelope no longer looked like a contribution toward the house. It looked like a flimsy veil trying to cover a very deep pit behind it. Looking at my father-in-law's evasiveness and my mother-in-law's uncharacteristic snapping, a name suddenly popped into my head. Hoang Phuc, Duck Min's youngest brother. For years, that name in my husband's family had been like a crack on an old wall. It started small but kept spreading wider, until it reached a point where everyone could see it, yet no one dared to tear it down and fix it properly. Phuc is 6 years younger than Duck Min, and since he was little, my mother-in-law has pampered him like a delicate egg. Mrs. Kim would always say that Min was sturdy, while Phuc was fragile and needed a little more care. Her little more lasted for decades, so whatever was good in the house had to be saved for Phuc first. Whenever he made a mistake, she would find a way to blame the circumstances. When Phuc's grades were mediocre, she said he was smart but hadn't had a good teacher yet. When Phuc quit his first job after 3 months, she said his boss lacked judgment. When Phuc spent a whole month's salary in a week, she said everyone is impulsive when they're young. When I first married into the family, I didn't hate Phuc at all. He was sweet-talked me, calling me sister and whenever we met. Sister and? He was always smiling, knowing just what to say to make people soften up. But after a few interactions, I started to realize that behind that lively exterior was a very dangerous person. He lacked stability and responsibility, yet always had enough excuses to make others pity him. One day he said he wanted to open a game cafe because it's the tech era and he had to follow the trend. A few months later, the shop closed, the equipment was sold off, and he claimed his friends cheated him. Then he switched to selling imported watches. In reality, it was all fake goods sourced from shady connections. When customers called him out, he cried to his mother that he was still young and made a small mistake, but people were pushing him into a corner. The first breaking point happened 3 years ago. It was nearly midnight that night. Duck Min and I had just turned off the lights to sleep when his phone rang repeatedly. It was my mother-in-law calling. As soon as he answered, Mrs. Kim's voice came through, trembling and choked with tears. "Min, come home right now, your brother is going to die. People are here at the house to collect his debts." I jumped up, my heart pounding. After much questioning by Duck Min, she finally admitted Phuc owed nearly 400 million from soccer betting. The creditors were at the gate, pounding on the door, threatening to stir up the whole neighborhood by morning if they didn't get paid. That night, my husband and I drove back to our hometown immediately. I still clearly remember the sight of Phuc kneeling on the floor, his hair a mess, shirt rumpled, and face ghastly pale. Seeing Duck Min, he crawled over to hug his legs, crying like a child. "Brother, please save me just this once. I swear to you both. If I get involved in those things again after this, I'm not human." Mrs. Kim On sat nearby, crying and hitting Duck Min on the shoulder. He was foolish, so his brother must save him. They are flesh and blood. If you don't save him, who will? Duck Min was furious at that moment, but eventually, he softened. He sold his very first car. The car he bought after years of working. The car he cherished so much that he washed it by hand every weekend. After selling the car and adding our savings, he paid off most of Fuck's debt. I cannot forget the look in Duck Min's eyes when he signed the sale papers. He wasn't childishly stingy, but I knew it was a reward to himself for his years of hard work. Yet, for his younger brother, he had to let it go. After that incident, Fuck was good for a few months. He worked as a sales clerk for a small company. He left in the morning and returned on time, sometimes even calling to check on me. My mother-in-law was overjoyed, boasting to everyone that her Fuck had learned to think, and that hardship had made him grow up. But when people truly grow up, they learn to fear the consequences. Fuck just waited for everyone to forget the old consequences so he could create new ones. Less than a year later, he got caught up in financial apps and online investment groups again. At first, he bragged about earning tens of millions a month. He persuaded relatives to invest, then the system collapsed. The money was lost, while the interest continued to pile up daily. This time, the figure was no longer a few hundred million, but over $1 billion. When the truth came out, Mrs. Kim On called Duck Min again, with the same tearful voice, the same plea. "Please save your brother. This time, I am truly begging you." I couldn't hold back anymore. I told her directly, the more you pay for him, the less he fears. He loses nothing, which is why he dares to repeat it. Mrs. Kim On, who was crying, suddenly looked up at me with eyes sharp as knives. "It's easy for you to say, but even if he is spoiled, he is still my son. Do you expect me to watch him die? You haven't been a mother, so you don't understand." That sentence felt like a slap in the face. I didn't argue further because I knew that in her eyes, all advice is heartless if it doesn't come with money. From then on, Duck Min began to change. He no longer rushed back home every time Fuck caused trouble. He no longer believed his brother's vows and tearful pleas either. He once told me, in a voice weary to the point of bitterness, "Fuck doesn't need money. He just needs to know that if he cries pitifully enough, someone will step in to clean up his mess." Hearing that, I felt sorry for my husband, because saying those words meant his heart was too hurt to keep deceiving himself. But Mrs. Kim On was not like that. Behind our backs, she still secretly sold gold, pawned savings books, and borrowed from relatives to save Fuck. She hid it from my father-in-law, from Duck Min, and from me too. Every time she was asked about her retirement money, she claimed it was in the bank or invested in business, or that she had lent it to an acquaintance for a few days. That vicious cycle just kept going on, until the day she dragged her suitcase to our new apartment, put an envelope with $150 million on the table, and said it was for the house. That was when I realized that perhaps behind that envelope, it wasn't just about my in-laws wanting to live with us. It smelled like another debt, another lie, and very likely a pit deeper than anything my husband and I had ever known. That afternoon passed strangely slowly. After replaying in my head everything related to Hoang Fuck, I could no longer see my mother-in-law dragging her suitcase to our house as a normal visit. But in front of my in-laws, I still tried to keep my composure. I didn't want to turn our new home into a battlefield of arguments right after moving in. Near 6 p.m., just as I intended to go to the kitchen to prepare dinner, Mrs. Kim On stood up before me. She rolled up her sleeves and said in a very excited voice, "Let me cook tonight. This is my son's new home. The first meal has to be cooked by me to feel warm." It sounded like an affectionate remark. But for some reason, I sensed something in it like staking a claim. I was just about to tell her she must be tired from the long trip. Let me do it, but she had already walked straight into the kitchen as if it had belonged to her for a long time. She opened the fridge and pulled out every compartment to look inside. Seeing me organize food in labeled glass containers, she scoffed, "Oh my, young couples these days are so fussy. Putting vegetables in boxes and meat in separate bags, living like this is exhausting." Then she opened the spice cabinet, held up a bottle of olive oil to the light, and clicked her tongue, wasting money on things like this for cooking. Back in my hometown, peanut oil is the best. I stood nearby with a faint smile, not responding. Usually, I probably would have explained. But that day, I suddenly felt I didn't need to explain anything in my own home. As she cooked, she criticized every single thing. About the dishwasher, she said it wastes electricity and is only for lazy people. About the induction stove, she complained there's no flame and the food wouldn't be fragrant. Even the set of dishes I just bought, she picked up to examine and said, "They're so thin, they'll break if dropped." A house with elderly and children should use sturdier things. I heard the words elderly and children and felt a slight stir inside. Parents-in-law I can understand, but who are the children here? There are no children in my house. Or was she already planning for Hoang Fuck to bring someone to stay over later? Duck Min was sitting in the living room with my father-in-law. I looked through the kitchen door and saw him pouring tea for his dad, but his face looked very solemn. My father-in-law barely spoke, only glancing toward the kitchen occasionally and sighing. At one point, he intended to stand up and help, but Ms. Kim-on called out from the kitchen, "You sit still, let me and the daughter-in-law take care of the housework." What do men know about getting involved in this? That remark made me frown slightly. She said, "Me and the daughter-in-law," but from start to finish, she didn't let me decide anything at all. At mealtime, Ms. Kim-on took the initiative to sit at the head of the table. That was supposed to be where Duck Min usually sat, but he just glanced over and quietly pulled up a chair next to me. I knew he was holding back. She served food to my father-in-law and then to Duck Min, while leaving me to fend for myself. After a few bites, she started to speak up. "I've thought it over. Since your father has back pain, the bedroom near the bathroom is the most suitable. With a balcony that wide, I can grow some vegetables later. It's clean and saves money." I set my bowl down very softly. Duck Min kept eating in silence, without looking up. Seeing no objection, Mrs. Kim-on grew even more enthusiastic, saying it would be such a waste for just the two of you to live in a house this big. People are lucky to have their parents living with them. It brings warmth to a home. Besides, Duck Min is the eldest son. With his parents getting old, living with the eldest is filial duty. Or should the world laugh at you for buying a 12 billion dong house while leaving your parents stranded back home? I saw that every word of hers was wrapped in the language of filial piety, but inside, it was a very clever form of coercion. She didn't ask if we agreed. She just spoke as if the decision was already made and we were just there to comply. I glanced at Duck Min. He was still eating slowly, but the hand holding his chopsticks tightened slightly. Mrs. Kim-on brought up the Fong Bai from earlier again, insisting she wouldn't be staying for nothing, so we shouldn't overthink it. She had already contributed 150 million, and later, once she sold her other odds and ends, she would add more. That way, outsiders wouldn't be able to say anything. She would have a proper stake in the place. Duck Min finally looked up, but he still didn't say a word. His gaze was intense. Mrs. Kim-on seemed not to notice, or perhaps she chose not to. She even turned to me with an instructive tone, saying that once she moved in, the curtains and lights in the house should be changed. They are too bright. They hurt an old person's eyes. This apartment is pretty, yes, but it still needs to be adjusted to suit the person living there long term. Before I could answer, she continued as if discussing something obvious, saying that once she gave more money, we should redo the altar room and build a large wooden cabinet in the living room. An apartment without a proper place for worship feels cold. And Min's office is so large it's a waste. Later, when Fuck comes to the city to find work, he can stay there for a few days, which would be convenient. The moment the name Hoang Fuck was mentioned, the atmosphere at the dinner table seemed to freeze. My father-in-law dropped his spoon into his soup bowl. The sharp clinking sound rang out clearly. Mrs. Kim-on shot him a warning glance. I sat still, but my heart had turned cold. So it wasn't just my in-laws who wanted to stay, she was also paving the way for Fuck to enter this house. Duck Min slammed his rice bowl onto the table. It wasn't too loud, but enough to startle everyone. He stared straight at his mother, his voice so low and cold that a chill went down my spine. "How much money do you even have left to be asking for more?" Mrs. Kim-on froze for a few seconds. She probably didn't expect Duck Min to be so blunt at the dinner table. Then she immediately frowned, her voice rising. "What do you mean by that? I sold the house for 3 billion, I just haven't collected it all yet." Quote. Duck Min gave a faint, joyless smile, one filled only with disappointment and exhaustion. He looked at the 150 million envelope still lying on the coffee table in the living room, then turned back to his mother. "That 3 billion, he paused for a beat, and the words that followed seemed to drop like stones onto the cold floor. "Hasn't almost all of it been taken by Fuck?" The entire dining table fell into absolute silence. Mrs. Kim-on opened her mouth as if to scold him, but no words came out immediately. My father-in-law hung his head low, his aged shoulders trembling. As for me, sitting next to Duck Min, my heart was racing. I knew from that moment on, this first meal in our new home was no longer a housewarming dinner. It had become the place where the veil covering my husband's family began to be ripped away. Mrs. Kim On's hands shook visibly. The chopsticks in her grip fell onto the table, clattering against the rim of her bowl. She looked at Duck Min as if she had just heard the most absurd thing in the world. Just seconds ago, she was sitting at the head of the table, talking about fixing rooms and changing curtains, planning the wardrobe with the tone of someone who had already secured victory. Yet now, her face was deathly pale, her lips pressed tight, her eyes wide with panic. "What did you say?" she growled, but her final note trembled. "Duck Min, I forbid you from falsely accusing your brother. He may be wrong and foolish, but he is not the type to steal my money." Quote. Duck Min stared at his mother for a long time. His gaze was no longer angry as before, but filled with a disappointment so deep it made me choke. He did not answer immediately. He took his phone from his pocket, unlocked the screen, and placed it on the table. On the screen was a series of screenshots of transactions, bank transfer messages, short-term loan contracts, and detailed notes with dates. Sitting next to him, I felt my scalp go numb from just a glance. The numbers on there were no longer just a few hundred million. Some lines showed 580 million, some 920 million, and others over 1 billion. "Do you think I'm just making things up, Mom?" Duck Min asked, his voice lowering. "My friend works in financial services. He's not some street loan shark, but he was the one who mediated and introduced Fuck to those first loans. Out of respect for me, and knowing Fuck was my brother, they dared to disburse such large sums." Mrs. Kim On grabbed the phone, scrolling through the screen repeatedly. At first, she looked quickly, as if trying to find a mistake to refute, but the more she watched, the more her hand trembled. My father-in-law sitting nearby leaned in to look, his face turning ashen gray. I heard him let out a heavy sigh, like someone who had foreseen the storm but lacked the strength to stop it from crashing down. "This isn't right." Mrs. Kim On shook her head repeatedly. "Fuck told me he was just borrowing a little money for working capital. He said he had a business deal and needed the money to mature it. He even said that if he got through this, he would pay me back both the principal and interest." Duck Min gave a bitter laugh. "What business, Mom? Someone without a company, no goods, no contracts, and not even a stable monthly salary. What working capital is he talking about? He's robbing Peter to pay Paul, borrowing from apps, friends, acquaintances, and then through daily high-interest lenders, with interest compounding. The more he pays, the more it swells. As of today, the total debt has exceeded 4 billion. I went numb. Even though I guessed there was certainly trouble behind that 150 million envelope, the figure of over 4 billion still sent a chill down my spine. Over 4 billion is not just a simple stumble. It's a pit dug by countless lies, many cover-ups, and far too many misplaced acts of forgiveness. I looked over at my mother-in-law. She opened her mouth but couldn't get a word out. The face of the woman who moments ago was full of calculations suddenly seemed to have aged a decade. Duck Min opened another bank statement photo, turned the screen toward his mother, and pointed his finger at a large transfer. The 3 billion from selling the countryside house had barely hit the account when Fuck withdrew almost all of it the same day. "You said it was to pay off random debts and handle paperwork here and there. Where did that money actually go? Did you even check?" Mrs. Kim On jumped up, her chair screeching against the tile floor behind her. "That's impossible. He and I only had about 1.5 billion left to pay off. He said once that was paid, we'd be debt-free. The two of us could come here and live in peace. He even said that once he gets back on his feet, he'll bring us to a new house. That is exactly what he wanted you to believe." Duck Min said. "He never intended to pay off all his debts. He is using the money from the house sale to keep his other loans afloat. Where they pressure him, he throws a little bit in to buy more time. Where they haven't demanded payment yet, he just ignores them. You thought you were saving him, but you were only helping him prolong this scam for a few more months." My father-in-law suddenly clutched his head. His voice was hoarse. He seemed to have no strength left. "I told you already. I told you not to trust him anymore. That house was the last thing we had left. And you sold it. You didn't even ask me a single decent question." Mrs. Kim On whipped around to face him, but this time, she didn't have enough breath left to yell. Her eyes turned red, filled with both anger and fear. "What do you know? He is my son. He cried in front of me. He said if he didn't have the money, they would chop his legs off. I am a mother. How could I bear that?" Duck Min placed his phone on the table, closed his eyes for a moment, and continued, his voice colder than before. Quote, "If it were just debt, I would have thought you were just confused by his threats. But this afternoon, after taking your money, Fuck didn't use it all to pay off debts. He put a deposit on a used luxury car in his new girlfriend's name." The whole room seemed to freeze. Mrs. Kim On stood stunned, staring at Duck Min without blinking. I could hear the AC running on the ceiling, even the sound of scattered raindrops hitting the balcony glass, but for those few seconds, no one could breathe. Girlfriend? She stammered. He told me that girl was helping him with his business. Duck Min opened the final photo. In the photo, Hoang Fuck stood next to a stylish young woman, with a shiny car with temporary plates in the background. Fuck was smiling broadly. That smile didn't look like someone driven to a dead end. It looked like someone who had just fooled the whole world. Mrs. Kim On looked at the photo, her entire body swaying. The envelope of 150 million returned this afternoon suddenly felt cruelly bitter. It was no longer house contribution money. It was the final scrap of bone left after the house in the countryside was gone. Her retirement savings and a mother's trust had been drained by her own youngest son. She took a step back and collapsed into a chair. Her hands clutched her chest, her lips trembling uncontrollably. Did he deceive his own mother? No one answered, because the answer was right there on the phone screen glowing on the dining table. Duck Min looked at his mother with eyes both pained and hardened, while I sat silently, my heart heavy. I understood from that moment that my husband's family tragedy was no longer just about a mother wanting to interfere in her son's home. It was the price of blind indulgence and just the first blade ripping through the fake shell of peace. After Duck Min finished speaking, the dining room sank into a heavy silence. Mrs. Kim On slumped in her chair, clutching her chest, eyes still glued to the photo of Hoang Fuck standing by the luxury car. My father-in-law hung his head, his aged shoulders shaking, while I stood up to clear the bowls, really just looking for something to do to keep from suffocating. Mrs. Kim On kept muttering the same sentence. It's impossible. He couldn't deceive his mother like that. Her voice fluctuated from low to high, as if she were both comforting herself and pleading for someone to prove it was all a misunderstanding. But Duck Min didn't comfort her. He sat opposite his mother, his face cold and weary. After a long moment, he said, "Mother, the way he's acting is killing this whole family. Today it's Mom and Dad's countryside house, tomorrow it will be our home, and after that, our reputation, our careers, and all our lives." Stop it. Mrs. Kim On suddenly looked up, tears streaming down her face. He is your brother. Even if he's wrong, he's still your own flesh and blood. You're the older brother. How can you say such heartless things? Duck Min gave a faint smile, a smile that sounded more painful than a sigh. I've been a brother for long enough. Mom sold the car to save him, drained savings to save him, and begged people to extend his debt. But does he even consider me his brother? Or does he just see me as a wallet that hasn't been emptied yet? That sentence left Mrs. Kim On speechless. She turned her face away and didn't answer. I looked at the wall clock. It was nearly 11 p.m. outside the glass window. The city was lit up but unusually cold. I thought after such an outburst, at least tonight everyone would be silent to reflect. But only a few minutes later, the doorbell suddenly rang incessantly. It wasn't the polite ring of a guest, but a frantic, continuous pressing as if to break through the door. I started and looked at Duck Min. He immediately stood up and walked to the camera screen by the door. Just one glance, and his expression darkened. In the hallway was Hoang Fuck, wearing a black jacket, his hair messy, face haggard, but his eyes shifting constantly. Standing behind him were three strangers, one with a buzz cut and a tattooed neck, holding a phone, another, thin and toothpick chewing, leaning against the wall, and the last, wearing a baseball cap, looking directly at the camera as if wanting to be seen. "Open the door, big brother, please save me." Fuck pounded on the door, his voice raspy. "They're pushing me too hard. If you don't save me tonight, I'm really going to die." Mrs. Kim On, upon hearing her youngest son's voice, jumped up like a soul possessed. "Is that Fuck?" She rushed to the door, but Duck Min immediately blocked her. "Mom, stay back." "What do you mean stay back?" She pulled away. "Your brother is out there. He's calling for help, and you're just standing there watching?" Duck Min didn't open the door right away. He pressed the intercom button, his voice very calm. "Fuck, why are you bringing strangers to my house?" Fuck outside immediately wailed. "Brother, I'm at my wit's end. They just want to talk. Let me in, please. You guys are so rich. You live in a 12 billion dong house, after all. Can you save me one last time?" The guy with the crew cut behind him stepped closer to the camera. In a low, menacing voice, "Since your family has money, let's settle this quickly. Your brother owes us over 1.2 billion. If we don't get the money today, we'll visit your company tomorrow. Quote, I felt a chill down my spine hearing that. It wasn't because I hadn't heard of debt collection, but because for the first time, such filth was standing right at my new front door. The house I had thought was the safest place of all. Duckman gritted his teeth and opened the door a crack, but kept the safety latch on. Fuck immediately shoved his face into the gap, and upon seeing his mother, he shrieked, Mom, save me. Tell Min to help, he still has money. If he doesn't save me, I'm truly dead. Quote, Mrs. Kim-on burst into tears, reaching her hand through the gap to touch her son. Fuck, how did you end up in such a state, my son? But in that instant, I saw something that made my heart turn ice cold. While crying to his mother, Fuck was darting his eyes very quickly around the house. His gaze swept past the liquor cabinet, the speaker system, the imported wall clock, and stopped at the decorative shelf near the door. That wasn't the look of a desperate man. It was the look of someone calculating what in this house could be traded for cash. He lowered his voice. You think I didn't hear that? Speaking to the guy behind him, this house has a lot of valuables. Don't make a scene. Let me talk to them first. I felt like someone had doused me with a bucket of ice water. Duckman heard it too. He threw the door wide open, not to let Fuck in, but to grab his collar and drag him fully out into the hallway. Do you think my house is your debt repayment facility? He growled. Get out of here right now before I call security. Fuck was dragged stumbling, but a second later he collapsed onto his knees in the hallway. He banged his head against the tile floor, wailing loudly, intentionally letting the whole floor hear. You two are so rich, yet you refuse to save me. Do you want to see me get my hand chopped off? Do you want Mom to have a heart attack and die with me? The doors of the neighboring apartments started to crack open. There were whispers, the sound of slippers shuffling on the floor, and someone asking quietly, what's going on? Mrs. Kim-on's face turned deathly pale. She turned to Duck Min and me, her voice a mix of pleading and command. Just give him the money first. If people see this, how will we ever face our neighbors after just moving in? I looked at her, feeling a sudden, deep chill in my heart. Even at that moment, what she feared most wasn't that Fuck was wrong. It wasn't that he brought creditors to his brother's home, or that he treated our apartment like a warehouse. What she feared most was the neighbors seeing it and losing face. It was the facade of a respectable family being torn apart in the hallway of a luxury building. Duckman turned to his mother, his words falling heavy and sharp. Look closely, Mother. This is no longer your poor, youngest son. This is a man who is holding our entire family hostage. Once Duckman finished, the hallway outside our door went silent for a few seconds, but it didn't last. Hoang Fuck remained on his knees, clutching his mother's legs, crying like an abandoned child. The three men who came with him stepped back a few paces, but their eyes stayed fixed on our apartment door. I knew if Duckman softened and let Fuck in, tonight this home would no longer be a home, but a pit for burying money. Duckman didn't argue further. He called reception directly, demanding security come up immediately. Less than 3 minutes later, 2 uniformed guards came running. Duckman pointed at the group outside, his voice firm, these people are not guests of my family. From now on, without direct approval from my wife or me, none of them are allowed on this floor. The guy with the buzz cut sneered and started to say something, but seeing the guard on his radio, he just gestured to Fuck. You remember that. If there's no money by tomorrow morning, don't blame me. With that, he turned and walked away. The other 2 men followed sluggishly behind him. Hoang Fuck was pulled up by the guards, but he still looked back into the house, his eyes filled with panic and hatred. Before the elevator doors closed, he shouted something that made Mrs. Kim-on nearly collapse. Mom, if you don't save me, tomorrow they'll go to our hometown and dig up our ancestors' graves. If you let me die, do you think you'll be able to live in peace? That sentence was like a knife plunged straight into my mother-in-law's weakest spot. Mrs. Kim-on stood frozen at the door, her eyes bloodshot, stammering her youngest son's name. Duckman shut the door, locked the deadbolt, and turned to his mother. Listen carefully, Mom, he's using both the living and the dead to pressure you. If you keep being soft-hearted, you aren't saving him at all. You are leading him to a point where he no longer knows what fear is. Mrs. Kim-on didn't answer. She just turned away, tears streaming down her face. That night, no one in the house slept well. I lay next to Duck Min, hearing him sigh to himself several times. Out in the living room, I could occasionally hear my mother-in-law sniffling. I thought she was crying from the pain of finally seeing how far her youngest son had fallen. But I had underestimated the blindness of a mother who was used to using pity as an excuse to condone behavior. Nearly 4 a.m., I woke up hearing a very faint noise in the living room. At first, I thought my father-in-law was up to use the restroom, but the sound of a cabinet drawer opening, something hitting glass, and stealthy footsteps made me fully alert. I turned to see Duck Min still tossing and turning in his sleep. Perhaps because I was too restless, I sat up quietly, put on a coat, and opened the bedroom door. The kitchen light was still on, and the side door near the balcony was cracked open. The night wind blew in, making the thin curtain flutter gently. On the living room sofa, Hoang Fuck was curled up, still wearing his dirty shoes, with a jacket draped over his stomach. I stood frozen in place, my blood running cold. He had returned. Into the very house that Duck Min had just forbidden him from entering, he had stepped inside. Before I could call my husband, Mrs. Kim On came out from the kitchen, holding a glass of water. Seeing me, she started, and the water sloshed, nearly spilling. She lowered her voice quickly. He was so tired. I just let him sleep here for a moment. I'll tell him to leave first thing in the morning. I looked at her, unable to believe my own ears. She had gone down to bring Fuck up, avoiding my gaze. He is your brother-in-law. It's so late at night, how could Mom let him wander the streets? Before I could answer, my eyes caught the display cabinet drawer wide open. My files of receipts, warranty boxes, and notebooks were pulled out and scattered. The wine cabinet door was also ajar, and a few of Duck Min's collectible bottles had been moved. I hurried to the watch cabinet near the bookshelf, my heart pounding in my chest. The black velvet box that held Duck Min's keepsake watch was empty. I rushed into the dressing room. The small drawer inside had also been pried open. My mini safe containing my wedding gold displayed a 3-attempt lock error. Someone had repeatedly entered the wrong code. A chill ran down my spine. This is no longer a case of a mother loving her son and letting him sleep over. This is a blatant burglary. Duck Min, I called out loudly. My husband stepped out of the bedroom very quickly. Seeing the scene in the living room, he froze for a few seconds. His gaze shifted from surprise to pain, and finally to a suppressed, extreme fury. Hoang Fuck jumped up from the sofa, his hair disheveled, but he was quick to deny it. Why are you two making such a fuss? I was just looking for a headache pill. I was dragged out by those guys last night, and my head feels like it's going to explode. Duck Min said nothing. He walked straight to the watch cabinet, looked at the empty box, then turned back to look at his younger brother. Where is my watch? Fuck swallowed hard. I don't know anything. Why are you asking me that? Just then, his phone fell from his pocket onto the floor. The screen lit up, clearly showing an unlocked message. If you've got the goods, bring them out fast. I'll close the deal this morning. I saw it, and Duck Min saw it too. Fuck lunged for the phone, but it was too late. The atmosphere seemed to explode. Duck Min stepped forward, grabbed his brother by the collar, and jerked him off the sofa. He didn't hit him, but his other hand punched the wall by the door so hard it bled. The dry thud made me jump in shock. He gritted out every word, his eyes turning red. You came into my house to steal. Hoang Fuck turned pale, but he still tried to argue. Don't say such harsh things, I was just borrowing them. I was desperate, so I just turned to them for a bit. I'll pay it back later. Duck Min let out a dry laugh. You pried open my wife's safe and you call that borrowing. Mrs. Kim On rushed to block Fuck, her arms spread wide as if shielding a child. He's at his wit's end. Your brothers, and you're planning to call the police? Is a watch and some gold worth more than your own brother's life? I stood frozen in the middle of our pristine living room that had been ransacked, watching my mother-in-law protect the son who just tried to steal from us. In that moment, I realized something truly painful. Mrs. Kim On can no longer distinguish right from wrong. To her, as long as Hoang Fuck is crying, begging, and calling her Mom, every one of his sins can be pardoned at the expense of others' assets, honor, and peace. After discovering Hoang Fuck rummaging through our things, I no longer look at my mother-in-law's suitcases in the same way. At first, I thought they were just clothes, items from the countryside, or some dry food she brought along as an excuse to stay. But now, every sack and every cardboard box sitting prominently in the corner of the room feels like a black box full of secrets. If someone lies enough to bring debt collectors to their brother's doorstep, what wouldn't they do? After recovering the watch from Fuck's jacket pocket, Duck Min didn't say another word. He simply demanded that Fuck leave the house that very morning. Meanwhile, Mrs. Kim On sat silently crying on the sofa. She still refuses to believe that her youngest son actually intended to steal. She kept repeating, he was just desperate. He's not a bad kid. I didn't argue because some people only wake up when the truth hits them in the face. And they always view kind advice as cruelty. I started tidying up the things my mother-in-law brought, both to clear the mess and to check if there was anything unusual. In a sack filled with old blankets, I found a few of my father-in-law's clothes folded very carelessly. In the cardboard box next to it were a few packs of glass noodles, a jar of dried bamboo shoots, some mung beans, and a bag of herbal medicine. But when I reached the dark brown suitcase from which Mrs. Kim had taken the 150 million envelope, my hand suddenly stopped. There was a strange bulge in the lining at the bottom of the suitcase. I pressed down lightly and felt something hard underneath. I initially thought it might be my in-law's documents and intended to call her to retrieve them, but for some reason, an intuition made me pull the small inner zipper open myself. A stack of photocopied papers, folded in half and tucked deep under the lining, fell onto the floor. I bent down to pick them up. The first page bore the heading, "Deposit receipt for house lease and land use rights for a 5-year term." I read those words over and over again. My heart suddenly started pounding. It wasn't a sales contract, not a transfer deed, it was a lease deposit agreement. My hands began to grow cold, bit by bit. I flipped to the next page. The tenant was a stranger named Trin Ba Tung. The recipient of the money was neither Mrs. Kim nor my father-in-law. The name that appeared at the bottom of the page stunned me, Hoang Phuc. Beside it was a red thumbprint and his signature. The deposit amount was clearly stated as 600 million Vietnamese dongs. Wait, not 600 million, 3 billion. I stood motionless in the living room, feeling as if the entire story had just been flipped upside down. So the ancestral home hadn't been sold at all. It had just been leased long-term for a quick lump sum, and the person who took the money was Hoang Phuc. I immediately understood why Mrs. Kim only had 150 million left. I also understood why my father-in-law had been so silent since entering the house, his face heavy like someone who had lost his soul. "Duck Min," I called to my husband, my voice raspy. "Come here and look at this." Duck Min walked out from his office, took the papers, and his expression darkened after reading just the first few lines. He quickly flipped to the last page, saw Hoang Phuc's name, and closed his eyes. It wasn't just surprise anymore, it was fury. My father-in-law was standing nearby at that moment. He tremblingly reached out his hand to ask to see it. Duck Min handed him the stack of papers. He put on his glasses, but his hands were shaking so much that they slid off the bridge of his nose. Halfway through the page, Mr. Van Looy suddenly collapsed into a chair. His eyes turned bloodshot. For the first time since coming to my house, he burst into tears. That house was left to me by my parents. I kept it for decades, never daring to renovate it too much for fear of losing its old charm. Yet now he's pawned it off like a piece of junk. Hearing her husband sobbing, Mrs. Kim jumped up from the sofa. She snatched the papers, scanned a few lines, and turned deathly pale. "That's not right. Phuc told me it was a temporary house sale agreement. He said to do the paperwork early so the money would be transferred faster." Duck Min looked at his mother, his voice sending a chill down the spine. "Since when is there such a thing as a temporary house sale agreement, Mom? Why did you sign something you didn't even read? Or do you just believe whatever he says?" Mrs. Kim opened her mouth but couldn't argue back. She clutched the papers to her chest as if holding a corpse. I watched her, feeling both angry and cold inside. This woman, who just yesterday proudly claimed she sold her house for 3 billion to move in with her son. It turns out she was just a pawn pulled into a play directed by her youngest son. But what hurts is that she brought that act to our dining table, using it to force us to open our door. Duck Min immediately picked up his phone to call a friend who works in finance. He put it on speaker. The person on the other end was silent for a few seconds after hearing Hoang Phuc's name, then sighed. "Min, I meant to tell you more, but I was afraid you'd be shocked. Phuc didn't just owe outside groups. He also used your mother's personal info to take out loan app debts. In some cases, he took her phone for facial verification. In others, he tricked her into giving him OTP codes. The total amount in her name is now nearly 1 billion. Mrs. Kim staggered back, nearly bumping into the tea table. 1 billion? No, I didn't borrow it. I never touched a single cent. Duck Min's friend continued, his voice heavy. On paper, it's different. The borrower is your mother. If the parties sue or sell the debt, she will be the first one named. As for the country house, even if it isn't sold yet, if the creditors track down the lease and that deposit, everything will get very messy." The call ended, and the room went deathly silent. Mrs. Kim slumped to the floor, the papers dropped from her hands, her face was drained of color, her lips trembling without making a sound. This time she didn't cry out in lament, nor did she scream to defend fuck anymore. She just stared blankly into the distance, like someone who had just realized she wasn't a mother sacrificing herself for her child, but merely prey being drained of every last drop of blood by the very child she loved most. I stood next to Duck Min, looking at the 150 million dong envelope lying silently on the table. It turned out that wasn't money for the house. It was the final remaining scrap left over after a long and cruel string of lies. And I knew from that moment on, my husband's family could never go back to the way things were. Less than 2 days later, the real catastrophe happened. It was a weekday afternoon. I was sitting in my office, trying to finish my quarterly report, when the apartment intercom rang. The receptionist's voice from the lobby sounded very tense. "Ms. In, could you please come down to the lobby for a moment? There is a group of people gathered here saying they want to meet Mr. Duck Min's family." My hands froze over the keyboard. Ever since Hoang Fuck rummaged through our things, I had told security not to let anyone associated with him come up to our floor, but I didn't expect them to choose to drag themselves straight to the apartment lobby. I called Duck Min immediately. He was close to home, so he arrived just 10 minutes later. The two of us stepped into the elevator without saying a word, and only the steady hum of the elevator made my heart feel even heavier. As the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, the scene before me left me stunned. Right in the middle of the bright lobby, over a dozen people were gathered in a circle. Some were filming with their phones, while others held up cardboard signs scrawled with red letters. "Hoang Fuck, pay up, rich families shouldn't dodge debts." Quote, living in a 12 billion dong apartment while avoiding responsibility, though security tried to block them, the screeching shouts rang out, making every passing resident stop and stare. A woman in a tight dress with heavy makeup held her phone high, live streaming. She alternated between filming her face and panning the camera toward the apartment logo behind her, screeching, "Everyone look, a family living in a 12 billion dong home that lets their younger brother borrow money and then defaults. Living so luxuriously while refusing to pay back what's owed. If I can't meet the family today, I'll live stream this so the whole world knows." My blood seemed to run cold. This is no longer just a normal debt collection. This is public shaming, deliberately using public opinion to force others to submit. I look at Duck Min. His face is icy, but his hands are clenched so tightly his veins are bulging. He works in finance and knows quite a few people. Just one edited clip or one malicious caption spreading around. The career he has built for years could be seriously affected. Sure enough, among the residents watching, someone already recognized him. A middle-aged man whispered to the person next to him, "I think this guy works in financial appraisal. I've met him at a conference before." The remark wasn't loud, but it was enough for me to hear. I felt a pang in my heart. Hoang Fuck's dirty business is starting to splash mud on innocent people. Duck Min stepped forward, keeping his voice calm. "Who is the representative? If you want to talk, go to the security office. You aren't allowed to cause a scene in this residential area." The woman live streaming immediately shoved her phone into his face. "You're Hoang Fuck's older brother, right? You're so wealthy, yet you let your brother hide from his debts? The money you used to buy this house must be very clean, right?" I said coldly, "Watch your mouth. Debts are the responsibility of the one who owes them. We didn't borrow any money from you." She sneered and turned the camera toward me. "Look here. The sister-in-law has spoken up, everyone. They're well off but eager to shirk their responsibilities." Whispers started to break out all around. The security guards were unsure how to intervene, fearing conflict with a crowd filming on their phones. Just then, the elevator behind us opened. Mrs. Kim On and my father-in-law stepped out. Perhaps hearing the noise, she couldn't help but come down to look. As soon as she saw the debt collectors, her face turned pale. She leaned against the wall, nearly collapsing. I hurried forward to support her, but the woman live streaming was faster. She pointed straight at her and shouted, "There she is. This is the one who promised to sell the house to pay her son's debt and is now hiding." Quote, "Back in the countryside, you spoke with such certainty, and now that you're at your rich son's house, you're playing the victim?" Mrs. Kim On shook violently, her lips trembling, but she couldn't say a word. I suddenly realized that Hoang Fuck didn't just deceive his mother. He even brought creditors to her hometown, using her own promises to build trust. In the eyes of these people, my mother-in-law is not a victim. She is the guarantor, using her honor, her house in the country, and her blind maternal love. Duck Min pulled his mother's arm. "Mom, go upstairs, let me handle this." But Mrs. Kim On could no longer walk. She suddenly collapsed to her knees in the middle of the lobby, hands clasped, sobbing uncontrollably in front of everyone. "I really don't have any money left, and the house can't be kept like before either. Please spare my son. He is foolish. He was lured by others. I beg you all. I stood there frozen. The woman who just a few days ago wanted to take $150 million for the house and wanted to rearrange the rooms in my apartment is now kneeling in the apartment lobby, begging creditors to spare her youngest son. But those people were not moved at all. A man in a black shirt sneered, took out his phone, and played a recording. Hoang Fuck's voice rang out clearly through the phone speaker. My brother's family is very rich. They just bought a $12 billion apartment. If things get desperate, just force the old lady to sell more land. She will take care of it no matter what. She is terrified of me dying. Mrs. Kim-on snapped her head up. Her body turned to stone, her bloodshot eyes wide open, no more tears falling. I knew that statement hurt more than any debt note, any number, or any insult. Because for the first time, she heard from the lips of the child she loved most that, to him, she was just a crying ATM. Duck Min stood next to his mother, his voice so cold it made me shiver. Did you hear that clearly, Mom? Do you still want to save him? Mrs. Kim-on didn't answer. She just sat slumped in the middle of the lobby, hands hanging down, her face as empty as someone who had lost their soul. Security finally called the local police to file a report because the group was causing a disturbance. But before the crowd dispersed, my phone suddenly vibrated. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. If you want things to be quiet, prepare $2 billion tonight, otherwise there are many more clips. I looked at those words, and my spine went cold. I handed the phone to Duck Min. He glanced at it for a second, and his expression changed completely. I understood immediately that the storm in the lobby was just a prelude. The person pulling the strings still hadn't fully revealed themselves. After the chaos in the apartment lobby, I thought we had hit rock bottom, but it turns out some bottoms are just steps leading into an even deeper abyss. That evening, after the local police finished the report and the group was escorted out of the building, my whole family returned to the apartment, exhausted. Ms. Kim-on was barely able to speak. My father-in-law helped her sit down on the sofa. Meanwhile, Duck Min stood on the balcony for a long time, looking down at the traffic below with a face heavy as stone. His phone rang continuously. At first, it was colleagues checking in, then a few long-term clients. They didn't say it directly, but every word felt like a needle. Min, I just saw something online about an incident at your apartment building. Is everything okay with your family? Information is very sensitive these days. We have to re-evaluate our files. Some even hinted that working in finance while having family members tangled in such debts is bad for one's personal reputation. I hope you understand. I stood by his side, listening to every call, and felt a suffocating sense of pity for my husband. Duck Min hadn't borrowed a single penny, hadn't signed any guarantees, and certainly hadn't received any benefits from Hoang Fuck's debts. Yet, just because of blood ties, the mud from his younger brother's life began to splash onto his own career. After the fifth call, he turned the phone off and placed it on the table. I noticed his hand trembling slightly. This isn't good, honey, I whispered. This is no longer just about Fuck's debts. Duck Min nodded very slowly. I think so too. Normal creditors would just find ways to demand their money. No one prepares a live stream or recording at exactly that moment unless there is someone guiding them from behind. That statement sent a chill down my spine. I recalled the text message from the strange number. If you want this settled tonight, prepare $2 billion. Otherwise, there are plenty more clips. It didn't sound like a standard debt collection demand. It sounded like a calculated script aimed at the honor, career, and fear of public humiliation of a wealthy family. That very night, Duck Min called an old friend named Quan, who used to work in risk management and had connections with several financial fraud investigation units. He kept it brief. Help me investigate Hoang Fuck's recent connections. Don't tip him off. I need to know which group he's running with. Quote, the other end was silent for a few seconds before replying, I understand. But if there are already live streams and demands for money, you should prepare yourself. This is no longer just a reckless younger brother. Quote, that statement kept me awake all night. Ms. Kim-on sat huddled on the sofa, occasionally startling at her phone as if Fuck were calling. But this time, she didn't dare call her youngest son first. Perhaps the recording in the lobby had cut too deep. A mother who once believed that if she just cried with her son, everything would pass. Now she began to understand that her own tears had been priced and traded by him. The next morning, Quan sent Duck Min a folder of information. I couldn't see everything due to the personal data involved, but just hearing Duck Min's summary made my blood run cold. Hoang Fuck wasn't just borrowing money here and there. He had joined a group that specialized in creating a facade of being from a wealthy family to take out loans. They solicit investments and drag relatives in to act as shields. The group had people specializing in faking repayment ability records, others who filmed clips and spread rumors on social media to apply pressure, and some who acted as creditors but were actually part of the same scheme. Their model was very simple yet vicious. First, they find someone like Hoang Fuck, a spendthrift, short on cash, whose family appears well off. Then, they encourage that person to show off photos of houses, cars, and successful siblings to build trust with lenders or investors. When the debt balloons, they stop demanding it from the debtor directly and instead swarm the relatives' homes, where the real assets are, to force the family to pay out of fear of losing face. I sat listening, my hands turning ice cold. This means this apartment, Duck Min continued, his voice heavy, has been a target from the start. He recalled a few months ago, when we had just put down a deposit on the house, Hoang Fuck suddenly showed an unusual interest. He texted to ask which floor the apartment was on and what the square footage was. Did we have the deed yet? Was the price really 12 billion? Back then, Duck Min just thought his younger brother was curious, even sending him a few photos of the living room since it was a new home after all. Thinking back now, every one of those questions felt like he was gathering intel to show off to his creditors. I also remembered that before my in-laws arrived, Fuck called me asking aimlessly, "And, is apartment security strict at your place? Do guests need to register beforehand?" At the time, I thought he wanted to visit for a housewarming, but it turned out he was scouting the path. That afternoon, a text from an unknown number popped up on my phone. This time it was just one line: "You don't have to pay up, but I still have some interesting things about Min's work." I handed the phone to Duck Min. As soon as he read it, his expression truly changed, not with the usual anger, but with tension, deep tension. I had never seen him like that before. He stood up immediately, went into his study, opened the filing cabinet, and checked every drawer. I followed him, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. A moment later, he stopped at the cabinet on the right. The case for the backup USB was empty. He stood still for a few seconds before turning to look at me. His voice rasped that he must have entered the study the night he stayed over. I gripped the edge of the desk to keep from wobbling. That USB held risk assessments, compiled customer data, and several internal work documents. It wasn't stuff Fuck fully understood, but if edited, screenshotted, and leaked, Duck Min would face serious repercussions, possibly even suspension pending investigation. My phone buzzed again. It was the same number. A third message appeared, short and bone-chilling. $2 billion for the USB. Don't try calling the police. We're family. Don't force me to burn bridges. I stared at the word "me" in the text, and my whole body turned ice cold. The sender wasn't a creditor, nor some group out there, but Hoang Fuck. The younger brother who just knelt and cried at the door, begging mom to save him and being shielded by her until the end, is now holding a knife to his own brother's career. Duck Min held the phone for a long time, then he spoke each word, low and heavy. From this moment on, Fuck is no longer a brother who needs saving. He is the one preparing to drag this whole family into the abyss. Duck Min stood in the middle of his office for a long time, eyes fixed on the empty box where the backup USB should have been. I had never seen that room feel so cold. Before, this was where he worked late into the night, where I would bring him a hot cup of tea and gently remind him, "Take a break." But now, every cabinet, every file folder, and every paperclip on the desk looked as if they had just been rummaged through by filthy hands. He opened each drawer to check, and the compartment containing the customer summary documents was askew. A folder for appraisals that he had once marked with a blue sticky note was also no longer in its proper place. Duck Min is an extremely organized person. Even if someone moved an item on his desk by just a few centimeters, he would notice. So, when he quietly pulled out a chair to sit down, interlocking his fingers on his forehead, I knew this was more serious than I had thought. "Is the data in there that important?" I asked softly. He looked up at me, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "It's not some huge secret like in the movies. But it is work data, with risk assessments, internal analysis, and the names of several major clients. If someone in the industry reads it with full context, it's fine, but if segments are cut and screenshots are posted online with slanderous claims, I'll have to answer for it. The company will suspend my access for investigation, and clients will lose their trust. Years of building it up could collapse just because of a fool waving a knife around blindly." I felt a lump form in my throat as I listened. Until now, I had always thought that all Hoang Fuck wanted was money, but from that moment on, I understood that when someone is mired too deeply in debt and lies, money is no longer the only limit. He would burn anyone's reputation, career, or family ties, just to buy a few more days living in his delusions. I looked at my husband and asked a question we both already knew the answer to. Was it fuck who took it? Duck Min clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. Only he had stayed in the living room that night. He hadn't locked the office door because he thought that with his parents home, no one would touch anything. He was wrong to still think he knew where the line was drawn. My phone vibrated again, the same unknown number. This time the message was even colder. Get 2 billion ready, or I'll send these documents to Min's rivals first, then to the company later. Don't make me do something drastic. I showed the screen to Duck Min. He just glanced at it and closed his eyes. In that moment, I saw he was truly in pain. It wasn't the pain of losing a USB, nor the fear of being threatened, but the agony of a brother finally admitting that the sibling he'd saved time and again had turned into an extortionist. Mrs. Kim On walked in from the living room, likely having heard the phone, and asked urgently, "What did he text? Did he say where he is?" Quote, her voice was still trembling, but there was a faint glimmer of hope in her eyes. Perhaps she still hoped this was just a moment of panic for Fuck, and that if she could just find him, hug him, and cry with him, her youngest son would return to being the good child he once was. Duck Min handed the phone to his mother. After reading it, her face went pale. Yet, her first reaction was still to defend him. He must have just panicked and said something foolish. He's being backed into a corner. He's just talking nonsense to get money. He wouldn't have the heart to hurt his own brother. You two are brothers by blood. Duck Min looked at his mother, his voice so cold it held no trace of softness. If you still trust him, the next person he sells out will be you. Mrs. Kim On looked as if she had been slapped. She took a step back, her lips trembling. My father-in-law walked in, holding my mother-in-law's old phone. He placed it on the desk, his voice hoarse as he said, "I found it in her coat pocket. There are messages Fuck sent before she came here." Mrs. Kim On turned sharply to her husband. "You went through my things." Mr. Van Looy didn't get angry. He just said wearily, "I didn't do it to catch you out. I did it because I wanted to know how much more he has deceived us about." Duck Min picked up the old phone. The screen had a deep crack in the corner, but it still opened. In the message inbox, the name Hoang Fuck appeared repeatedly. He scrolled down, reading each line like stabs uncovering the truth. "Mom, just go to Min's house first. Tell them you sold the house and have nowhere to go. They won't dare to kick you out. Remember to bring a lot of luggage so it seems more convincing. Just give them 150 million first. Don't give them everything. Just say you'll give the rest later. That way, and won't be able to say anything. Mom, just cry about your old age, and tell them the eldest son has to be filial. Min is very proud. He won't make a scene in front of Dad." I felt a chill run through my entire body as I read that. So my mother-in-law showing up with suitcases and that 150 million envelope wasn't just a reaction to being swindled. It was a calculated step in Hoang Fuck's plan. He knew Mom's weakness was her blind love. He knew Duck Min's weakness was his sense of duty as the eldest son. He knew I, as the daughter-in-law, would be pressured by the concept of filial piety, and he placed us all like pieces on a chessboard. Mrs. Kim On read those messages, and this time, she couldn't defend him anymore. She sat down on the chair by the door, covering her face with her hands. There was no loud crying, just stifled sobs caught in her throat. I knew she was falling apart bit by bit. The greatest pain isn't being deceived by an outsider, but realizing you've placed a lifetime of trust in the hands of a child who is calculating against that very trust. Duck Min set the old phone down on the table. A moment later, he looked up at me. His expression had changed. The confusion and pain were gone, replaced by the cold clarity of someone pushed to the edge and choosing to strike back. "I won't give him the money," he said. I nodded. "So what do we do?" He wanted to meet him at a place with clear security cameras, somewhere busy enough to be safe but not too loud. He wanted him to say everything himself. I understood my husband's plan. If we sent the money, Hoang Fuck would never stop. If we lashed out, he would have an excuse to play the victim. The only way was to let him expose himself, state his intentions, and turn his threats into evidence. Duck Min took the phone and texted the unknown number back. If he wanted money, we would meet in person tomorrow night. The old cafe near the lake. Bring the USB. After sending it, he turned to me, his voice low but steady. This time, he wasn't saving his younger brother, he was saving our family. I looked at him, then quietly picked up my phone to call an acquaintance who was a lawyer. I didn't go into detail, just asked how to legally record evidence during a meeting involving potential blackmail. The person on the other end replied, "Stay calm, don't provoke him, let him do the talking, and absolutely do not go alone." I hung up. Looking out into the living room, Mrs. Kim On sat motionless, Dad sat with his head bowed beside her, and Duck Min stood in the middle of his violated office, his eyes darkening. That night, I realized we were no longer just dealing with a family debt. We were entering a real confrontation with the very person who used to be called the baby of the family. The next evening, a light rain began to fall. Small raindrops clung to the car window, dragging into streaks under the yellow streetlights. I sat next to Duck Min, my palms ice cold even though the car's air conditioning had been turned down. The meeting with Hoang Phuc took place at a cafe near the lake, a spot Duck Min had chosen carefully, not too empty to avoid danger, and not too noisy for words to be lost. Most importantly, the cafe had cameras at the entrance, the cash register, and the tables by the window. Before leaving, Duck Min arranged for Ms. Kim On and my father-in-law to sit in a hidden spot behind a large plant. At first, my mother-in-law didn't want to come. She was afraid of seeing Phuc, afraid of hearing his cruel words once again. But Duck Min only said one thing. "Mom, you believed him with your tears for too long. Today, you have to hear it with your own ears." Ms. Kim On didn't reply, she just silently changed her clothes and followed. We arrived 10 minutes early. Duck Min chose a table near the window, a spot where the camera could clearly record the person sitting opposite. There were only 2 glasses of water on the table. He placed his phone face down beside him, and I kept my handbag on the chair next to me, inside which was another phone recording per the lawyer's advice. I don't feel like I'm doing anything terrible. I only feel like I'm protecting my home from someone who no longer knows shame. At exactly 8 o'clock, Hoang Phuc appeared. He walked into the cafe in a black designer jacket, wearing sunglasses even though it was dark, his hair slicked back, and white sneakers so clean they were an eyesore. If you didn't know the situation, no one would think that man was drowning in debt. He didn't come alone. Beside him was a young girl named Trami, whom Duck Min had once shown me a photo of posing next to an old luxury car. She wore a tight dress, carried a designer bag, had sharp makeup, and looked me up and down as if pricing a piece of merchandise. Phuc pulled out a chair and sat down, not greeting his mother, not asking about his father, and not looking around. He took off his glasses and placed them on the table. His first sentence was ice cold. "Cut the moralizing, I need money." Duck Min looked straight at him. "Where is the USB?" Phuc laughed, a dry, hollow sound. It sounded so unfamiliar. "Where the money is, the USB is. You work in finance and don't understand two-way transactions? 2 billion. Transfer it, and I'll hand over the goods. I'm even giving you a sibling discount." Trami, sitting next to him, curled her lip, her voice sweet but venomous. "I'm being honest, you two live in a 12 billion house. Spending 2 billion for peace is cheap. If this blows up, you'll lose your reputation and your jobs. By then, it'll be too late to regret it." I looked at her, and a wave of revulsion rose within me. Not because she was greedy, but because she talked about ruining a family in the same tone as haggling for a handbag. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm. "Phuc, do you even know that your mother sold her last source of security for you?" Phuc leaned back in his chair and shrugged. "That country house was just rotting away anyway. What's wrong with selling it to save your youngest son? Besides, that was my parents' house. Why are you two so worked up about it?" At the table behind me, I heard the faint sound of a glass clinking against a plate. Mrs. Kim On's hands must have been shaking, but Phuc didn't know his mother was sitting just a few steps away. He continued speaking, his tone becoming as smooth as if he had rehearsed it. "Mom loves me the most. She could never abandon me. A few tears, a little kneeling, and she'll hand the money right over. Old people like that get terrified the moment you mention dying." I looked at Duck Min. His expression didn't change, but his hand on the table had clenched into a fist. I knew how much that statement must have cut him. It didn't just insult his mother, it exposed how Phuc had been exploiting their family bond for years. From behind us, Mrs. Kim On stood up abruptly, her chair screeching harshly against the floor. She lunged forward, her face deathly pale and her eyes bloodshot. Phuc turned around, and before he could react, she swung her hand and slapped him directly across the face. The slap rang out clearly throughout the shop. Nearby customers were startled and looked over. "You call that a mother's love?" Mrs. Kim On said, I sold the house, pawned my gold, borrowed money, and knelt before others for you. And you sit there saying I'm easy to deceive. Fuck clutched his face, stunned for a moment, before his gaze immediately turned resentful. You hit me? Do you think you're so clean? Quote, do you think I wouldn't dare post everything about you online? My father-in-law hurried over to steady his wife, but Mrs. Kim-on kept staring at her youngest son. Her whole body was trembling, not out of fear, but because the last bit of blind love in her heart was being crushed by her own son. Only then did Duck Min slowly place his phone on the table, turning the lit screen toward Fuck. I am saying every word clearly. Everything you just said has been recorded. The cafe's cameras have it all too. You threatened me, blackmailed me, insulted Mom, and admitted to using her money to cover your debts. Fuck looked at the phone, his expression shifting for a moment. He glanced quickly toward the cashier counter, then up at the ceiling corner where the camera was. For the first time that evening, I saw genuine panic appear in his eyes. But Hoang Fuck is not the type of person to stop when caught red-handed. He stood up abruptly, knocking the glass of water on the table onto the floor. The glass shattered, and water splashed everywhere at my feet. Fine, he gritted his teeth. You two want to play this to the end, right? If you don't give me the money, we all go down together. Min loses his job, and loses face, and Mom lets the world know she raised a son like me. I have nothing left to lose. Duck Min also stood up, but he didn't rush to fight, didn't swear, didn't lose control. He just looked at his younger brother, his gaze both pained and cold. You're wrong, Fuck. You still have something to lose. You're losing your last chance to be a decent human being. Fuck sneered, pulling Tra Mi's hand to leave, but before walking out, he turned back to look at Mrs. Kim-on and dropped a line that sent shivers down my spine. Remember this, Mom. From today on, if you choose Min, don't ever call me your son again. Mrs. Kim-on didn't chase after him. She stood frozen in the middle of the cafe. A print of her hand was still visible on Fuck's cheek. As for her heart, it was likely shattered into pieces. I stepped forward to help her sit down. This time, she didn't cry out loud. She only watched the silhouette of her youngest son disappear into the rain outside the glass, her lips trembling. Turns out, for all these years, Mom has been raising a knife inside her own home. No one replied because we all understood that after tonight, Hoang Fuck certainly wouldn't stop. And that meeting at the cafe was just the starting point for his dirtiest counterattack yet. I had guessed right. A person like Hoang Fuck, when cornered, won't know how to bow his head, let alone how to stop. He only knows how to claw, drag down, and smear everyone who still stands higher than him. That very night after our meeting at the cafe, not long after we had brought my parents-in-law home, Duck Min's phone started ringing non-stop. Messages from the resident group, messages from colleagues, and even calls from acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in ages. I opened my phone, and my heart just sank. On a social media page, Hoang Fuck had posted a clip less than a minute long. It was cut to show exactly the scene where Mrs. Kim-on knelt in the apartment lobby, hands clasped, tears streaming as she begged the creditors to spare her son. In the background were debt collection signs and a crowd of residents watching. But the clip didn't include the recording of Fuck mocking his mother, the scene of creditors causing a scene, or his threats to extort money from Duck Min. All that remained was the image of a mother kneeling and weeping in a luxury building. The caption Fuck wrote underneath was truly malicious. My brother bought a 12 billion dong house, living high up looking down, but made our parents sell their home in the countryside and still won't let them stay. My mother begged on her knees, but couldn't move his heart. Strangers care for me more than my own flesh and blood. With just a few short lines, he turned Duck Min into an unfilial, wealthy brother, me into a cold-hearted daughter-in-law, and himself into a pitiful victim abandoned by his family. The clip spread terrifyingly fast. In the resident group, someone commented that every family has issues, but letting one's mother kneel in the lobby like that was truly unsightly. Another wrote that buying a 12 billion dong house but failing to provide for one's parents is heartless. Some strange accounts even deliberately mentioned the name of Duck Min's company, hinting that if someone in finance lives so ruthlessly, customers should be careful. I looked at those words, and my chest felt like it was being crushed. Before the truth could even get dressed, a lie had already dragged it out into the public square. Mrs. Kim-on sat on the sofa, her hands trembling as she held the phone. She read the comments attacking Duck Min and burst into tears. But this time, her tears were no longer to defend Hoang Fuck. She looked at her eldest son, her voice choking. It's mother's fault. I have ruined you. If I hadn't listened to him, if I hadn't dragged the whole family up here, you wouldn't be getting insulted like this. Duck Min did not blame his mother. He just sat quietly, eyes fixed on his phone screen. That silence hurt me even more than any scolding could. I know he can handle being misunderstood by strangers, but being backstabbed by his own brother using their mother as a pawn hurts far more. I placed my hand on my husband's shoulder and told him slowly not to reply right away. The more impulsive we are, the easier it is for him to lead us around. Duck Min turned to look at me, his eyes filled with weariness but also trust. I opened my computer and immediately called the lawyer who had advised us the day before. After listening, she simply said, "Don't retaliate, don't get emotional. Organize the evidence chronologically and post it all at once with clear proof. Keep the parts related to Min's work data separate to handle with the authorities, don't put everything online." I began gathering every piece. Messages of Hoang Fuck demanding 2 billion, messages threatening to send documents to Duck Min's rivals, the recording from the coffee shop where he clearly said, "It's easy to manipulate mom," a few tears and she coughs up the money, and the 5-year rural house lease agreement with Fuck's name on the payment. The bank statements showed that as soon as money entered the account, it was withdrawn. Photos of the used luxury car Fuck put a deposit on for TRAMI. And the messages where he instructed his mother to pack a suitcase and come to our house to put pressure on us. Each piece of the puzzle was put together, without additions or deductions, without speculation. The more I organized it, the colder I felt. Hoang Fuck was not acting on a whim. He had a plan, a sequence, and a goal. He used his mother as a shield, his brother as a piggy bank, social media as a knife, and the scariest part is that he knows exactly what he is doing. By nearly 11 p.m., I posted a single entry with no profanity and no wailing. I just wrote it out chronologically, from the story of my mother-in-law bringing 150 million to our house to the discovery of over 4 billion in debt, the rural house lease, the extortion messages, and the meeting at the coffee shop. At the end of the post, I wrote a sentence that made my own heart tremble at that moment. We do not refuse to support our parents. We refuse to become a safe for an adult who uses debt to manipulate the entire family. I attached the evidence with sensitive information redacted, keeping only the necessary parts. And finally, I posted the shortest, clearest audio clip. Hoang Fuck's voice rang out coldly. "Mom is so easy, just a few tears and she'll hand over the money herself." In less than half an hour, the tide began to turn. Those who had scolded Duck Min went quiet. Some residents in the building spoke up to confirm the debt collectors had arrived and caused a disturbance. They filmed and shamed us first. Someone commented that if the evidence is true, this brother and sister are very sensible. You can't use filial piety to force people to pay a brother's debts forever. Another account wrote, "This isn't unfilial. This is setting boundaries with a debt-addicted person." Those who had watched Fuck's clip started deleting their posts or editing their comments. Not only that, the very woman who live streamed in the lobby was also tracked down by netizens. It turns out she had appeared in several similar debt collection incidents, specializing in using social media to pressure families to pay. Some people in the resident group sent me the full video from the lobby, which included the scene where those people shouted and shoved their phones in our faces. When the truth is finally brought into the light, it begins to have its say. Near midnight, Duck Min's phone rang. It was Hoang Fuck. He turned on the speakerphone, and from the other end came heavy breathing, then death threats hissed through gritted teeth. "You dare to play me to the end, huh? You really want me dead, don't you?" Duck Min closed his eyes for a few seconds then replied very calmly, "No, I'm just done being the trash bin for your life." The other end went silent, then Fuck burst out laughing. A laugh that gave me goosebumps. "Fine, you think you're so smart, let's see who has more to lose." The call cut off abruptly. The living room fell silent again. But I know that silence is not peace. Hoang Fuck has lost face before his mother, his brother, and even the whole internet. And someone like him, when his pride is crushed, will not choose to stop. He will choose a more reckless, dirtier action, just to drag others down with him. After that threatening call, Hoang Fuck disappeared for 2 whole days. No messages, no calls, not a single new post. It was that silence that made me more uneasy than the times he spent screaming or hurling insults. You can predict what an angry person might do, but it's hard to guess what someone who has lost all face and retreat, suddenly goes quiet like they're holding their breath, is planning. Mrs. Kimon was not the same either. She didn't dare mention giving money, didn't dare ask Duck Min to look for his brother, and certainly didn't dare defend Fuck in front of me. For those 2 days, she just sat in the corner of the sofa, holding her old phone, Opening the messages Hoang Fuck used to lure her to our house over and over. Sometimes I saw her wiping away tears, but when Duck Min walked by, she would quickly turn her face away. A mother who once used tears as a weapon now didn't even dare to cry out loud. On the evening of the third day, Duck Min and I went down to the garage to get the car to buy some supplies for his parents. I still remember that moment very clearly. The garage was dim, the smell of gasoline and cold concrete mixed together. I had just opened the passenger door when Duck Min's phone let out a jarring alarm. He looked at the screen, and his expression changed immediately. It was a warning from the apartment door lock system. Someone was trying to open the door with an invalid resident card. Duck Min opened the front door camera. On the screen, a man in a black baseball cap and a face mask stood with his head bowed in front of our door. No matter how well hidden he was, I recognized that figure. Hoang Fuck. He looked around the hallway and then held up a card to try scanning it again. The lock flashed red. He frustratedly tapped the door handle, muttering something I couldn't quite hear. "Where did he get that card?" I asked. My heart was pounding. Duck Min gritted his teeth. "Mom's old card. The other day she said she lost it in her coat pocket. He must have taken it while rummaging through her things." I immediately called the front desk, requesting security to go up to our floor right away. At the same time, I called the local police, clearly stating that someone who had blackmailed my family was trying to break into our apartment. While I was talking, Duck Min kept his eyes glued to the camera. After failing to open the front door, Hoang Fuck disappeared from the frame for a few seconds. Then the side hallway camera signaled movement. He was heading toward the emergency exit, which leads to the utility floor. "This is not good." Duck Min opened the car door, his voice urgent. "He's planning to loop around the side balcony." I felt a chill go through me. Our apartment is on a high floor, but the side balcony is close to the air conditioning maintenance area. No normal person would dare to climb across that. But someone as desperate as Fuck is different. He doesn't care about safety. He just needs to create a scene big enough to drag us into the mud with him. We rushed up in the elevator with 2 security guards. When the elevator door opened, the hallway was deserted, but a clattering sound echoed from the utility stairwell. "Metal," a guard shouted. "Who's in there?" "Stop." The noise stopped instantly, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. Duck Min lunged forward, and I followed, but a guard held me back. Just a few minutes later, they apprehended Hoang Fuck at the access to the side balcony. He struggled frantically, his mask slipped to his chin, his eyes bloodshot like an animal trapped in a corner. On his shoulder was a gray backpack. When the guard opened it to check, I felt frozen cold. Inside were pliers, a roll of tape, a fruit knife, fabric gloves, and another phone with a post already drafted on the screen. A guard glanced at the content on the phone and looked at us, his face turning pale. I took it to look, my hands trembling. The post was written and waiting to be published. My brother hired people to beat me to silence me. I only came to ask for my personal belongings back, but I was assaulted. If anything happens to me, everyone, please look for Duck Min. A chill went down my spine. If we hadn't caught Fuck on the spot that night, if he had harmed himself or deliberately staged a struggle, my husband and I could have been framed. All the evidence we just presented could have been twisted by him into a reason for a different story. Wealthy brother hires people to silence his own younger brother. Fuck was still screaming in the middle of the hallway. "I am the younger brother of the homeowner. You have no right to hold me. I just came to get my things. They're framing me." Duck Min stood in front of him, panting from having just run. He looked at the backpack on the ground, at the small knife mixed in with the items, then at his younger brother. His voice was hoarse, not loud, but it cut to the bone. "From the moment you took that knife to my door, you are no longer the brother I need to save." The elevator door opened, and Mrs. Kim On and my father-in-law stepped out, likely having heard the noise and rushed up. The moment she saw Hoang Fuck being held by security and looked down at the backpack on the ground, her face turned deathly pale. She trembled as she stepped forward, looking down at the knife, the roll of tape, and the phone with the unfinished post. No one needed further explanation. Everything was all too clear. This time, Mrs. Kim On didn't rush to shield her son, didn't wail for mercy, and didn't accuse Duck Min of being heartless. She just stood there, her aging frame seeming to shrink under the cold hallway lights. Her lips trembled, her voice breaking. "My son, how did you end up like this?" Hoang Fuck turned to his mother, his eyes devoid of regret, filled only with anger and spite. He gave a cold, faint laugh, his voice sharp as a blade. "It's because you're so poor that I'm miserable. If you had more money, I wouldn't have ended up in this state." That sentence fell into the hallway like a hammer blow. Mrs. Kim On stumbled backward, clinging to the wall to keep from falling. I saw something go out in her eyes. Perhaps it was the last shred of blind love she had held onto for all these years. It wasn't that she stopped loving her son, but that she finally understood that in Hoang Phuc's eyes, that love was never a home, just a wallet that was too thin. The local police arrived very quickly. They inspected the scene, documented the items in the backpack, the prepared post on the phone, and the door alert history. Duc Min handed over copies of the blackmail messages, and I provided the camera footage. My father-in-law stood nearby, his face pale, one hand supporting his wife. When the officer asked Mrs. Kim On if she had anything to add, she remained silent for a long time. Then, she slowly took an old phone out of her pocket and handed it over with trembling hands. In here, there are messages where he told me to go to his brother's house, told me to lie, and told me to force his brother and sister-in-law to take his parents in. I would like to hand this over. Hoang Phuc glared. Mom, what are you doing? Are you trying to hurt me? Mrs. Kim On turned to look at him, tears falling. But for the first time, her voice did not tremble with fear. No, this time I'm not hurting you, I'm just stopping you from hurting anyone else. That statement made the entire hallway fall silent. I stood beside Duc Min, his hand gripping mine very tightly. For the first time, Mrs. Kim On stood on the side of the truth, even though the price to pay was the youngest son she had spent her whole life covering for. After the night Hoang Phuc was detained in the apartment hallway, everything happened faster than I expected. The police worked continuously for days because besides the trespassing, Phuc's phone contained a series of threatening messages, blackmail content, and plans to spread false information to force Duc Min to pay up. The group of people who had come to the apartment lobby to livestream and cause trouble were also summoned for questioning. Some of them were loud at first, but when they learned the building's cameras had fully recorded them yelling and filming to mock others in a public place, everyone started to quiet down. As for Trami, the girl who once sat next to Phuc at the cafe and sneered that $2 billion to buy peace was cheap, she disappeared faster than anyone else. Reportedly, after knowing Phuc could no longer get money, she immediately blocked him and took down the post featuring the old luxury car. The deposit for that car was also completely lost because the contract was non-refundable. I heard the story but felt no gloating, only sadness. A man who spent his whole life living on appearances and empty promises was finally consumed by those very things. Mrs. Kim On completely collapsed after the incident, but what hurt her most was not the money, nor the fact that her country house had been rented out long-term. What made her age in just a few weeks was the feeling that she had loved the wrong way her entire life. There are mornings when I get up early to make tea and see her sitting silently on the balcony, looking down at the street for a long time, her phone lying beside her but no longer ringing, no more calls of "Mom, save me" like before. And it is precisely that silence that leaves her feeling hollow. My father-in-law has become even less talkative. He has hardly stepped out of his room for several days straight. One day, as I passed by, I saw him sitting there holding his old glasses without wearing them, his eyes staring aimlessly at the wall. Then one evening, as Duc Min was checking documents with his lawyer, he suddenly spoke up, his voice hoarse and slow, as if he had to gather all his courage just to speak. "I am sorry." Duc Min looked up at his father. Mr. Van Looy bowed his head very low. "I have known it was wrong for a long time, but I wasn't firm enough to stop your mother. I kept thinking he was still young and would grow up eventually. Who would have thought that the more I loved him, the further I pushed him away?" Duc Min did not answer immediately. He just quietly poured his father a glass of warm water and placed it in front of him. "I know he is hurting inside too. No matter how wrong Hoang Phuc was, he is still his own brother. No one wants to see their own flesh and blood reach such a point." But after all, Duc Min still drew a very clear boundary. One evening, he sat down to talk frankly with his parents right at the dining table. His voice was calm, not reproachful but very firm. "You can stay here temporarily for a month to settle your minds and handle the paperwork. But this house will not accept financial contributions, take on debts, or shelter anyone else related to Phuc anymore." Mrs. Kim On sat still for a long time before finally nodding. There was no more talk of the eldest son having a responsibility, nor any mention of contributing to the house. Perhaps after everything, she finally understood that a home cannot be built on coercion or guilt-ridden filial piety. I also made it clear to my parents-in-law that from now on, all expenses, documents, and resident cards must be transparent. It is not because I am selfish or suspicious, but because I do not want this house to be turned into a place for others to exploit our compassion ever again. The next day, Mrs. Kim On brought the envelope of 150 million and placed it back in front of me. It was the same yellow envelope she took from her suitcase that first day, but now it no longer felt like a demand. She pushed it gently toward me, her eyes red and swollen. I have no face left to call this a contribution anymore. If you'll allow it, I'd like to use this to pay down the loans in my name. I looked at the envelope for a long time, then gently pushed it back. I won't accept this money just for myself, Mother. Tomorrow, Min and I will take you and Father to see a lawyer. We'll handle each debt legally. It's better than letting the interest swallow you whole. Hearing me say that, Mrs. Kim On burst into tears. But this time, her tears were no longer meant to force anyone into submission. It was the relief of someone finally letting go of the pride that had weighed down the whole family for years. The months that followed passed slowly but more peacefully. Duck Min and the lawyer helped my parents review every loan in Mrs. Kim On's name, negotiating the legitimate ones and reporting the fraudulent ones. The house in the countryside wasn't lost entirely, but it had to be leased long-term as per the signed contract. Even so, at least it was still standing, not sold off completely as she had feared. About 3 months later, my parents-in-law moved into a small rented apartment near the hospital for convenience. The apartment was only about 50 square meters, much older than mine, but clean and quiet. The two of them lived on their pensions and the remaining money after settling their debts. Before leaving, Mrs. Kim On stood in the middle of my living room for a long time, her eyes scanning the place as if trying to memorize every corner. Then she turned to me, her voice so soft I almost couldn't hear it. Back then, I thought you were cold-hearted. Now I finally understand that the truly cold-hearted ones were those who only knew how to trade my tears for money. I looked at her, and in that moment, I no longer saw the woman who had once slammed a 150 million envelope on the table to force me to live with her. I only saw an elderly mother who had just endured a great deal of pain. Some lessons cannot be taught with words, only learned through loss. I didn't say much, just quietly poured her a cup of hot tea and pushed it gently toward her. Because sometimes forgiveness isn't in the words we say, it's in choosing not to bring up each other's wounds ever again. After his parents moved out, Duck Min replaced all the locks in the house, canceled the old spare keys, and installed security cameras and biometric locks. He did it calmly, without bitterness or resentment, just like someone who had lost their sense of safety in their own home and wanted to rebuild it from scratch. The 12 billion dong apartment finally returned to its true original purpose. No more crying for money, no more late-night calls, no more feeling like someone could walk through our front door at any moment. It became a place where my husband and I could have dinner together, drink tea on the balcony, and talk about work and the simple plans of a small family. Sometimes I still think about Hoang Phuc, about a child who was loved so excessively that he grew up without ever fearing the consequences. And I realized something very painful. There are some relatives we don't have to abandon, but we must certainly keep them behind a boundary. Because love without limits will, in the end, turn into a noose that strangles an entire family.